Hey, welcome everybody. I'm Brandon Laws. I'm going to be behind the scenes today helping Susie moderate this version of change management for leaders. Uh, this is supposed to be an in-person workshop that we moved to virtual given the circumstances. So I'll be behind the screen monitoring your questions. And just so you know, there are handouts and the PowerPoint slides within the GoToWebinar panel. And you could find it on that right-hand panel. You should be able to download them or at least open it up to view them. So if you have any questions, feel free to chat with me and I'll answer you while Susie's presenting. Okay? So I'm going to turn it over to Susie and I'll be behind the scenes from now on.
Hey, thank you, Brandon. So hopefully everybody can hear me well and can see me. If you have any challenges with the audio, please write a note in the chat window. I will be having some activities for you all to do, and I will be interested in hearing your feedback. So we will be using that chat window throughout the session. So please feel free to engage that way, or if you're more comfortable just listening, that's fine too. Okay, so as Brandon mentioned, there is a handout. It's called a participant guide, and it's a PDF document. And most of you, if you responded to accepting the virtual option of this training, would have received this in an email. But if you don't have it handy, like Brandon said, it should be available in the GoToWebinar program. I will be referencing some activities in this, so hopefully you have it available and you could at least review it, or perhaps even have had time to print it out. So we'll see how that goes. Okay, so welcome to the session. Change management is a huge topic this year, and ironically, skills like adaptability are becoming really important given our current circumstances. Our ability to make quick decisions, especially in the face of uncertainty, and provide regular communication and support employees through changing circumstances is obviously a really important thing for us today. So I'm not going to spend much time talking about the challenges that we're all experiencing as employers with the pandemic. I want to make sure that you get the value out of this training, but you may consider whether there are some tools or information that you get today that may apply for what's going on currently and how you're managing those types of changes. Okay, so what we're hoping to cover today is one, help you understand what are the most common barriers to change. We'll define change management, what that actually is and what it's not. And then we'll touch on, okay, what are some of those barriers that prevent people from moving through change as hoped? And with those barriers, we'll be discussing different strategies that you can consider implementing to help with that change management process. We have a change management model. So, probably at least a year or two ago, probably more than that, 2 years ago, I did some research on different change management models. And there was one that we decided to adopt and utilize here at Xenium and to recommend to our clients. And we will be walking through that model today. In your packet, you'll have a full explanation of that model, and you'll also have some of the tools that are associated with the model. There's also a lot of online resources that I'll mention as well. And then really the ultimate goal is that you'll be able to use the information and the tools provided in this session to actually apply to a workplace change initiative within your organization, whether it be a process change, whether it be implementing new technology, changing your structure within your organization. There are a lot of changes that you can use these tools for. Okay. Any questions or comments before we dive in?
No questions have come in
Okay.
so far, but
Great.
feel free to ask them.
So to start, I'd like you to do some reflection here. And I want you to think of a recent workplace change that you've gone through, or maybe you've been responsible for leading. So think within the last 6 months or so, maybe 6 to 12 months, what is an example of a workplace change that you've experienced? Okay. And I want you to consider these 3 questions. So number 1, was the change management, or was it managed within your expectations, right? So did it go well, in other words? The next question is, what made it a success? So what made the change initiative successful and achieve the desired outcomes? And then lastly, what made the change a challenge? Okay, so those 3 things, right? Based on a recent workplace change within the last 6 months, right? Was it managed well in terms of your expectations? What made it a success and what made it a challenge? So I'll give you just a few minutes to do that reflection, and please feel free to type your responses in the chat window. No. So feel free to type your notes. I don't have to identify the individual if we're sharing input or comments.
Yeah, that's one thing we'll note about this is that if you ask a question or give an example, we won't identify you, so we'll make it anonymous. So feel free to share.
Okay, any examples? Brandon, do you have any from your experience? I can share too.
You can go ahead and share while I think of it. So there's a couple people that are saying they're trying to type their notes right now, so we'll come back to them. But there's one person that did say we moved from a 1-page PowerPoint template to Bamboo HR to track performance goals, teams and individuals. Transition to Xenium PEO.
Okay, that's a big one.
Yeah. Let me see here. I think there's more to it. The challenges, maybe misunderstanding processes and things like that. Okay, we're getting more in here. Let me expand this a little bit. Scheduling changes. Provided material for operations, overloaded schedules with 6 to 7 times the amount of work they could accomplish on the front end. That's a good one.
So was that a challenge or an improvement? Okay. Yeah, so oftentimes when there is a change, so we're implementing new technology, new process, it translates into more work on people's desks, right? So when we're asking people to change, we're not only asking them to adopt new behaviors and habits, but also they're learning or doing something new often. And so it slows them down and it feels like it's adding work to their already current, busy workload.
So here's one. It's a little bit longer. So the example of a recent workplace change, I accepted a role as an interim director of my program. Was the change managed in line with your expectations? Yes and no. I had lower expectations for the smoothness of the transition based on the need for sudden change. Boss was ill. Didn't have a chance to reflect. Everything had been so fast. And then what made the change a success? Most administration was really open to the change and happy to have me on board, so offered themselves as resources and had lower expectations for me jumping into the role. What made this change a challenge? Lack of documentation for how the role was executed, loss of institutional knowledge, especially with relationships. That's very good, yeah.
Yeah. Right.
We're getting a bunch more.
Good.
See if I can keep up.
Yeah. Let's go cover a few more.
Okay.
So we've got examples of individual change, so change in one's role, change in a scheduling.
Okay, so this one's interesting. So transition of work functions to a newly formed department, successful, co-planning and open dialogue of different work functions, the challenge getting buy-in from staff on shift work responsibilities.
Okay.
Let's see here. Oh, here, you'll like this one, Susie.
Okay.
Changing from annual reviews to quarterly reviews.
Okay, yeah.
Change was in line with my expectations. What made it successful? Communicated with the team the new procedures and expectations. Provided one-on-one discussions with staff prior to rolling out new reviews. The challenge: some staff felt like the reviews were coming up more often, but they still like the change.
Okay.
That one seems to be pretty positive overall.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, so I'm hearing most of the examples involve multiple parties, right? So we're needing to get some buy-in and some participation and cooperation with the change. And sounds like there's some successes with that, and then also some challenges, which is fairly common. One example I think of personally, which I think a lot of organizations might relate to, is a few years ago, we implemented the CRM program. And we decided to use CRM in addition to housing all of our client information, to use it also for tracking service time for those clients. And, there was a lot of talk around how are we going to organize this information? What are the steps in terms of going in and tracking? What are we tracking? In what time increments? All of those nuts and bolts. And once those decisions were made by senior leadership, it was rolled out to all the employees. And the explanation was, hey, this is going to help us gain better understanding of where we're spending our time. And so we want you to track all your service activities with clients. So that was essentially it. And there was a little bit of training on how to go in and track your tasks. And then there was this kind of assumption that, oh yeah, everybody's going to do it and we're going to get great information. Well, for a very long period of time, and I would say even today, we have some resistance and challenges with continuous tracking of that information. And some of the things that we learned in hindsight were, number one, there wasn't clear communication around the value of the information that was being put into the system and how it was going to be used. and how it was going to help not only the organization, but the employees. And so that became a barrier to motivation for people, because people then perceived it as, oh, this is just another administrative task that I have to do, and it's a burden. So then we had to kind of backtrack and start building in some of that awareness around why it's important and how the data is being used to help inform business decisions. So I hear a lot around, especially around technology, because, you know, many organizations are automating their processes. They're not only implementing new technology, but they're updating their existing technology, and so, or converting to new platforms. And so that can be really, really disruptive for organizations. And so there's even a statistic that I remember our VP of IT threw out, that there's a percentage of people that naturally leave your company, like turnover, as a result of some type of technology conversion, right? Because it's highly disruptive to the organization. So those are all great examples. I want you to kind of keep those things in mind as we work through this model, and you might consider, okay, now that I have a model and some tools, how might I have applied those in a past change to make it go more smoothly?
I think a lot of people are probably looking at this recent workplace change for a lot of us who are working remote right now because of the coronavirus and the physical distancing. That's a huge change, and some organizations may or may not be set up. Like when we decided to be out of the office for 14 days, granted you and I are here right now, but most people are at home working. Luckily, our expectations were probably like, wow, this is a huge change for us. I don't know what to expect. Is it going to be easy to work from home? What made it a success, though, was we had the technology and the tools and the means to be able to communicate with each other and connect with clients and each other. The challenging part is most of us are used to being face to face.
Yes.
And so I think people are now getting used to video calls, and I think it was rolled out really effectively. And hopefully a lot of organizations are going through that same thing where they have the tools and they're over communicating and transparent. So that's just one that I thought of that
it's timely.
It's very timely.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's what we'll just talk about today. There are some applications for what's going on currently too.
And I'm getting a lot of people saying they agree with this. They're all going through this too.
Absolutely. And the uncertainty makes it really challenging, right? And I would say in times of uncertainty, awareness, which is usually built through communication, is more important than ever. So we'll spend some time talking about that. Okay, so the next thing I'd like you to refer to in your packet, if you have your participant guide on page 2, starts on page 2, it's a change management competency assessment for managers and supervisors. And so if you have that in front of you, you could either, if you have it printed, or you can do it separate, document it separately, go through this assessment. So I'll give you just a few minutes to go through and maybe rate yourself on how you think you are performing in each of these areas. You'll notice that it's very behavioral based. So go ahead and rate that, and then I'll be interested to hear some of your feedback about where you ended up on your scores. So I'll give you guys about 5 minutes or so to look through that. Mm-hmm. So if you are completing the assessment for your own benefit, I would be interested in hearing from folks via chat which of the 4 categories, so adapting, introducing, managing, and reinforcing change, which categories did you score the highest and which category did you score the lowest? Just to gauge where people are falling. So if you've completed that and added up your total scores in each of those 4 areas, I'm going to offer highest scored area and lowest scored area.
Some folks are saying that they need a little bit more time.
Sure.
So highest introducing, lowest reinforcing, one person said.
Mm-hmm.
Highest adapting, lowest managing employees.
Mm-hmm.
Person says, yikes. Highest score, intro and managing change, lowest score, reinforcing and celebrating success.
Mm-hmm.
Lowest in adapting to change, highest in managing others through transition.
Mm-hmm.
Highest adapting, introducing, lowest managing, reinforcing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a real variation. Yeah, I think that's indicative of some of our strengths, right? Some of us have different strengths as leaders, and some of us have, greater opportunities in certain areas. You know, their preferences for being more focused on people, right, and supporting people through change, and then there's focus on getting things done, right? So having that balance can be hard.
We're getting a couple pieces of feedback from folks that the audio is a little staticky.
Okay.
Not sure if it's, maybe people can mention if it's coming from my microphone or if it could be coming from Susie, but maybe just mention Susie or Brandon.
Yeah. Good. So the idea with this assessment, it's a tool, it's a self-assessment tool. So it's just a chance for you to understand what are all the different behavioral components associated with change management. And if you have a total score of 15 or less, that would be something that you might want to pay more attention to and consider, okay, how can I make sure that I'm being intentional around this part of the process? Okay, so just a tool for you to have to benchmark where you're currently at and maybe measure some of your progress in the future. Okay. Any comments on the audio?
The folks are saying it's pretty bad, and I'm listening in. It sounds like it's more of a connection issue.
Okay. Okay. Is that any better? A little bit better? Hopefully we got it fixed.
Yes. People are making jokes now. They're saying the Mike's got the coronavirus.
Well, at least we haven't lost our sense of humor,
Yeah,
right?
I love it. This is the first time we're doing a little virtual thing. So it's a USB mic that we're using. So I just plugged it back in. So if it happens again, let me know, people.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so let's move forward. If you're still working on your assessment, feel free to finish that up or come back to it later. When we talk about change management, sometimes we think about more of the process part of it, when in reality, change management is really about people and behaviors. And so for any change to be successful, it requires people to change their behavior in some way. And if any of you have tried to start a new habit, so whether it be exercising or like me, I try to meditate on a regular basis, and I tend to, struggle with that to be consistent. You know how hard it is to implement new behaviors and habits, even when they're aligned with your value system and what's important to you. So even if it's something that you really value and you're really excited about and you feel motivated to do, it can still be challenging. So the key here to understanding organizational change is that organizations themselves don't change, it's the people in them. And that's why this competency, right, being effective at leading and managing change can be really difficult to master. Okay, so we define change management in this course as the process, tools, and techniques to manage the people side of change to achieve your required business or organizational results. Okay, and as leaders, we probably play the most important part in that process, right? So we have to use our relationships, our communication, our trust building skills, our inspirational leadership, and our own adaptability to help, right, others be motivated to change their behavior. Okay. So the model that we use, it is called ADKAR, and we'll review it in a minute here. But it is put together by a certification body called ProSci. And here is an example of the components. So there's leadership sponsorship associated with change. There's some project management. So usually there's some function of a project or process, the tasks associated with a change. And then there's what we're referring to as the change management, and that's people supporting people through that change process. Okay, so leadership or maybe some executive sponsorship is providing that overall guidance and governance around the change. The project managers or folks involved in project management are providing structure and maybe some of the technical support associated with the change. And then the leaders, right? A lot of the supervisors and maybe some of your employees who are champions for the change are supporting the people side. Okay. The key is all three of these elements are critical and important for successful change management. So if we ignore the people side of change, so if we try to tell people or coerce people to change or to do things differently, we run the risk of not being successful, not achieving successful outcomes. And so here are some examples, and you can think in your past experience, change initiatives that did not go well, what were some of the outcomes, negative outcomes? So one is lower productivity, so lower motivation. There could be either active or passive resistance. So people saying, no, I'm not doing that, right? That's active resistance. Or maybe telling you or showing you that they're cooperating, but really they're not fully doing that. Turnover, mentioned that before. It could be people implementing some of the new behaviors and not others. It could result in some workarounds, which are then going to create some more problems or inefficiencies. Okay, if we'll talk a lot about reinforcement. If there's not reinforcement for the change, then people can revert back to their old comfortable ways of doing things. Okay, and sometimes it can create some issues around accountability, lack of accountability, and the us and them or silo mentality, because stress is high. Some people are showing support for the change, some people aren't. It's creating challenges for people in the way that they're doing their work. And not only is the change that you're wanting to implement not effective, but you also have people who are stressed out and demotivated. Any comments on any of this stuff, please feel free to add to the chat. So the model that we're looking at is the ADKAR model. And ADKAR, they're basically initials for each step in the process. Okay, so they're building blocks. So what that means is they layer on top of each other. So you have to start with the one, right, the first one, and you have to master that before moving to the next step in the change process. If you try to move through it too quickly, then you're going to have gaps that are going to have negative outcomes down the line. Okay, so here's what ADKAR stands for. First step is awareness. Okay, D is for desire. Right, so that's the internal desire and motivation by the individual to actually act. Knowledge, right? Do I have a full understanding of what I need to do differently and how to do that? And then there's ability, which is different than knowledge. So it's one thing to know, right, what I'm supposed to do, but to be able to be proficient at it and have the full ability is something separate. And then the last thing is reinforcement. Okay, so all of these steps we'll cover in detail. So when we look at awareness, how do we build awareness? Well, one of the things that I've noticed in my experience is a lot of decisions around change happen at the senior level within organizations. And so there's a lot of time spent by senior leaders in meetings, planning, discussing, right, this upcoming change. And those leaders have had time to process through it and get comfortable, right, and be able to have some open dialogue and discussion around the change and what are some potential considerations, outcomes. And then once they're comfortable and they have the decision made, then they go and roll it out to the rest of the company and quickly move to, here's what we're doing, and here's some training to help you do it. And the problem with this is that we skip a couple steps with employees. The first being awareness. So the employees don't have the benefit often of the same amount of time to process and ask questions and clarify their understanding of the reason for the change and exactly what's changing. Okay, so when we're building awareness, a lot of this has to do with communication. So communicating what is the nature of the change, okay? Why is it needed? And that could include what's the risk of not changing? So if we don't do this, what are the implications, okay? So this is building kind of the why behind the change, and also a little bit of the what. What is the nature of the change? Communicating how this is going to help the organization, how it's going to help the team, the individual, the value, the link to larger strategic objectives or initiatives is really important. And then allowing some time and space for employees to process and ask questions is really important here. On the bottom of page 7, there are some tips. So here are your strategies for creating and maintaining awareness. And I added the word maintaining because I will say this particular step, it carries through all phases of the change process. So, you build awareness on the front end, but you really do need to continue to build awareness throughout all of the ADKAR steps, okay? So some tips are here in bullet points. I talked to a couple of them. Being patient, being able to answer questions about how this change will affect me personally. Communicate frequently, and face-to-face communication is really important. So a lot of times we're working through email, and certainly now we're leveraging technology more. So how can we utilize video mediums? How can we utilize various modes of communicating to make sure that the awareness is there? So it's not just email, it's email and an in-person meeting. And maybe there are layers of that, okay? Listening, right? Listening and looking for signs of possible resistance. So that could be nonverbal cues. Giving employees some idea of what they can expect to happen and when. So some type of timeline. So there is some time and effort required before moving into this awareness stage. Creating a plan. So not only creating your communication plan, but even before that, creating some plan and timeline and the steps required for the change so that you can adequately communicate those, okay? All right, any questions on awareness? All right, so the next is desire. This one to me is probably one of the hardest ones. Because, it would be so easy if we could just control other people, right? We could just, we could sprinkle some magic or mind melding, I don't know, and get people to do what we want them to do. But we have to use our inspirational leadership and influencing skills to help others feel motivated, okay? Because again, remember I used the example of starting a new habit of exercising or eating well or meditating. Even though I logically understand the value of this, like this is going to make me feel less anxious or be more healthy or look better, whatever it is that's important to me, I still have to have that motivation and desire to change my behavior, right? And to do something that might be a little uncomfortable at first, okay? So we have to clearly articulate what's in it for me, this person. So how is it going to benefit them? And sometimes this is a hard question to answer when the change is at a very high organizational level. But it's something worth exploring. We need to understand that change is a personal choice. So there are some key strategies to supporting employees through this phase. And they have to do with understanding what barriers or obstacles are in the way for that employee. And by the way, it can vary by person, okay? So we're all motivated a little differently. So this is where your coaching skills and your listening and asking good question skills come into play as supervisors, because we need to be able to recognize, okay, this person's struggling, and not jump to the conclusions and say, oh, they're just resistant to change. They're negative. They're not a team player. Stepping back and saying, okay, something is getting in the way for them, and I need to ask some curious, open-ended, non-judgmental questions to help understand what's getting in the way of them being able to make this change. And then only then, once I understand that, can we start exploring some options that will help them. Ultimately, it's the employees or the person that you're asking to change. It's their decision to engage or participate. And I mentioned before, telling or coercing it's often what we try to do, regardless of our intentions, but it doesn't have sustainable impact or results, okay? People have to have that desire and motivation to sustain change behavior, okay? So
real quick, sorry.
Yes.
Some folks are asking about examples of questions about how that might look like.
Yeah, so the types of questions that you might ask to understand what's getting in the way for people. Yeah, so I think they could be as easy as, what do you see or feel are the barriers, right, to making this change, or what's getting in the way for you? It could be what's working well, what's not working well, what's making it difficult for you to feel positive about this, or is there anything, is there a tool, is there a resource that you feel is lacking, or support that's lacking? A good question is, what does support look like to you? Because that could look different, right? So how can I best support you, and what does that look like? So those are some examples of questions.
Perfect.
Yeah. For those of you who've had a chance to participate in our coaching and feedback workshop, and we also have a web course, we talk about the GROW model. And the GROW coaching model has a ton of sample questions, and there's some really good questions in there that you might reference for these types of conversations, okay? So when we're trying to build desire, influence desire rather, some tips here on page 8 in your handout. First one's just demonstrate that you're willing to dig into the issues that are holding them back. So, people need to feel that you're genuinely invested in helping them work through it. And you can only build that credibility and trust by following through consistently, right? So having regular check-ins and actually providing some of the support that's being requested.
A question we got that came in says, would asking them to explain how they understand the change for themselves be helpful? Maybe possible their perception of the change is misguided and needs a little bit of clarification.
Absolutely. I think that would also give you some insight into the whether there's a gap in awareness, because we might have missed something around building awareness and understanding of the change that may have been missed there. So that's great. Yep. We want to clear the barriers by having dialogue around them. So we can reinforce why the change is necessary or advantageous, and the risk if the change isn't successful. So those are conversations that you might have. Acknowledge the value. This is something that I believe strongly in, and I added, was acknowledge the value of the employee's contributions and abilities. So people want to feel valued. They want to feel like, hey, I'm making a difference here. And so if there's a way that we can reinforce for them that, hey, here's where you had strengths, or here's where you can really add value as it relates to this change is often helpful. Including expressing your confidence in their abilities. And here again, you'll see continue to communicate. So I would say build in regular checkpoints. If you already have a one-on-one touch base meeting system that's weekly or monthly, then that may be enough. That may be an opportunity to check in regarding a change, or it could be separate meetings and check-ins as it relates specifically to the change. But the key is having a regular cadence of communication and looking for understanding what barriers exist, and then using those coaching skills and that grow coaching process to identify some options for working through them. Okay, so coaching is a big application here. The next is knowledge. So knowledge, people generally think of training. Okay, so what training or tools are we going to provide to help this person, right? Is it a step-by-step process? Is it a training course? Is it training aids, right? Or reference tools? So really you need to think about all of those things and know that in most cases, with significant change initiatives, just a single training is not going to be enough, especially when you're looking at technology. So if you're implementing a new technology or converting, having just one training isn't going to make it stick. Okay, so everybody has a different learning style, and so when you're designing training as part of an initiative, you need to consider what are the various mediums and types of training I can offer that are going to fit multiple learning styles. Most people learn by doing, so having opportunities for people to practice and do things with guidance and support, having folks on the team who can serve as mentors, having aids or references that people can go to get information or follow up on steps following a training class. All of those things are really important. You may even do some initial assessment or get employees' input on the front end when you're building the training program to figure out what are the best tools and education that would work for them. Okay. So people need to know, how am I changing, right? How am I going to do this? I need to get the training. And again, it needs to be not just a class or not just a tutorial. It needs to include some instruction, some doing, and then some information to reference. In many cases, people are learning new skills. It's not even just changing behavior, they're learning new skills. And this may only be one piece of their job. And if they're not practicing and doing it on a day-to-day basis, they're going to forget it. So looking for opportunities to, right, help people practice it on a regular basis so it sticks. Okay. So some tips on the bottom of page 9. Create a plan for how to change, right, and how to perform effectively, and develop and document training requirements. Okay. Develop and deliver education that allows people to gain experience practicing. So I think practice is really important versus a one and done deal. Make sure you have adequate time allocated for the training. A lot of people can't be totally present or even show up to trainings because their workload demands are so high and they're not feeling that it's valued, or they're not receiving the support or encouragement from their supervisor to participate in that training. So that's something to consider. And think about how can we make this as user-friendly as possible, and consider maybe even mentorship or some user groups or forums. Okay. Any other comments questions. If anybody has ideas of things that have worked well for you all in the past, I'd love to hear about them too.
The only comments we're getting, they're saying the sound's getting shaky again. So I might reset our USB mic real quick. So, but as I'm doing that, go ahead and ask questions if you have any.
Okay.
Okay. No questions are coming
Hopefully
in yet.
that helps. Yeah, continue to give us feedback about the sound.
And we do have a comment here. So for technology adoption, we used a small SME group for a short time to fan out the knowledge base and help more people.
Great. Yep, so an SME group or user group or super users or, yeah, those are great.
I'm glad the sound sounds better. So we're using a wireless lavalier mic for Susie, so it could just be an interference issue. So if it comes up, we might just have to reset it every once in a while. Okay. Sorry about that, guys.
All right, so moving on from knowledge to ability. So how do we know that our training has been successful, right? All of our training aids and tools and processes. How do we know that they've worked, okay? This is a step that's often missed just for training in general, right? We roll out training and then we just assume people get it and they're gonna, perform well and everything's gonna be great. So we have to have some system for following up and measuring, right, and evaluating the effectiveness of the training, okay? So we have to measure the capability, right? We have to either through observation, feedback, or other measurable results, are these folks demonstrating the ability to not only perform the new task or skill, but also to be able to effectively sustain that. Okay, so we're looking at demonstrated capability to implement the change and achievement of desired change in the form of performance or behavior. Okay, so think about how can I measure abilities, right? What quantitative measures do I have? And if I don't have really good quantitative measures, maybe it's just feedback then, feedback and observation, following up and having those conversations or doing some surveys, okay? So some other tips for developing ability are on the bottom of page 10. So again, we're providing opportunities to practice and hone skills, not just during training, but on an ongoing basis. As leaders, right, we're modeling those new behaviors ourselves, right? And we're providing, again, additional coaching and training when there are gaps for people. We're assessing progress and commitment, providing feedback and coaching. We're making tweaks to our training or our knowledge base or tools to address those knowledge or skill gaps. And we're measuring progress on a regular basis, okay? All right, the last one is reinforcement. And this is something that gets missed often because, a lot of us like to check things off the box. We feel like, okay, we've implemented this change and, at least the large majority is functioning okay, so we're done. And reinforcement's really important because one of the risks of change not being effective and sustainable is people falling back into their old habits. So a way to help prevent that and also to reinforce the positive behaviors that we're seeing is to offer some type of praise, recognition, gratitude, or even a reward. You could even consider rewards. Okay, so reinforcement consists of actions that increase the likelihood that the change will be continued. Okay, so it could be just through the good old basics, recognition, and recognition that's meaningful and motivating to individuals, or it could be some financial incentive or rewards. And that would depend upon, the nature of the change. We talked a little bit about SME groups, user forums, super user groups that are often implemented for technology initiatives. There could be an opportunity for some additional compensation or reward for those folks. I think of like the extra effort bonus type thing, because those are people who are going above and beyond what others may be expected to do, or certainly considering their participation at that level when you're looking at your compensation reviews. That would be something that might be rewarded more highly. So tips for providing reinforcement. So some other ideas besides just regular recognition, individual, group, or peer recognition could be visible performance scoreboards. So, visual tools that show how certain teams are performing. You can make it, do the peer pressure competitive tactics, if that helps, or if that works within your workplace culture. Celebrating milestones and achievements. So again, if we have a plan with timelines, so there's all the tasks and stages associated with the change initiative, if we are taking the time to step back when we hit a milestone and examine what's been successful and celebrate those achievements, then that's likely to reinforce, right, that behavior before we move on to the next stage of the change. Okay. Acknowledgement from senior leadership. So some more global strategic communication around the value and the importance and recognizing employees for their efforts. That often goes a long way as well. Okay. Any other ideas for reinforcement? I'm curious from you all, is this a step in a change process that you find is skipped a lot, or have you had some good practices that have been effective for you? So maybe on either side of that. Has this been lacking for you in your experience, or have you seen some really good examples of ways of reinforcing change behaviors?
Nothing yet.
Okay. I will give you all just a couple minutes to think about your responses. We are going to, in another minute or two here, we're going to take a short break to give you a chance to stretch your legs, get up, step away from your computer, move around a little bit, do what you need to do.
Here's a response. Yes, definitely find this is either skipped or is an afterthought, and then a scramble to pull something together for the team. To be better, I think it needs to be pre-planned so it's ready to go.
Great. That's awesome. Yeah, so in your plan, right, actually building into your plan the recognition and the reward. Yeah. Fabulous. Yeah, you're right, because otherwise it's easy to skip over.
Yep. Another one, the recognition from senior leadership is often lacking. They tend to get sucked into the negative feedback versus the positive improvements that have been made. Oh man, we are all guilty of this, aren't we?
Yeah. Yeah. And ironically, the positive feedback and recognition is probably more likely to influence the desired behavior.
Absolutely. It reinforces, like we teach our children this.
Yeah. Yeah.
We reinforce through verbal praise, but I think a variety would be nice so that it doesn't feel like just another process.
Yeah.
Is there another way when recognition and acknowledgement has been expressed isn't enough, but there's no current routes to provide monetary rewards?
Okay.
Reinforcement has been toughest. So far, the best engagement I've seen was when I had a scoreboard. People like the competition.
Yep.
Rewards are hit and miss.
Yeah. Good. Those are all good.
Scoreboard's a great idea.
Yeah, I think it is. And it could be fun. You can do like the thermometer thing.
Yeah.
and make it a fun, competitive thing. And you can even tie some rewards to that, to team or individual achievements for each milestone. So I think those are all good ideas. Good. Okay, so let's take a break. Let's agree all to reconvene. I'm looking at my clock here. If we can reconvene at 2:15, that hopefully will give you enough time to take a quick break, and then we will regroup at that point. Okay.
Okay. Okay, we are gonna get okay, we're gonna get started here.
Okay, so we're back. So we talked about the different steps in the ADKAR model. How do we know that we're successful? So what are some signs that we can look for which indicate that we're being successful in our process? So here are some examples of things you might hear people saying. So for awareness, people might be expressing, oh, I understand why we need to do this. I understand the value or the importance of this. Desire, that's kind of obvious. I've decided to, might be an example of a statement there. Knowledge, I know how to. Ability, I am able to. And then reinforcement, I will continue to, right? So these are the examples of actionable statements that we would hope to hear from folks in each one of these stages. If there are gaps in any one of these areas, we need to step back and look at some strategies or corrective actions, okay? So what will we see potentially if there are gaps in these areas? So if there are gaps in awareness or desire, you might see employees asking the same types of questions over and over. Like, well, now, why are we doing this? You know, why is this better than the old way of doing things? You might see lower productivity or certainly turnover. Turnover could be for many reasons. So you hopefully you're catching that through conversations before it happens. But if you're seeing a decline in productivity or certainly a decline in engagement, hoarding of resources and information, sometimes when people are feeling insecure or uncertain about a change or direction the organization is going or how that might impact them in their position, some of that insecurity can show up in more control. They need to do some self-preservation or more control type behaviors. So it could show up in hoarding of resources or information. And that's just an indication that that person's not feeling secure or fully aware. And then obviously some delays in implementing the change or a sign. Without knowledge and ability, you'll see obviously lower utilization of the process or system that you're trying to implement, or certainly ineffective use of it. Employees' level of confidence may be reduced because they're not feeling capable. And it could also show up in, unfortunately, the customer experience. And certainly the employee's overall performance. And then the last one, if there's not reinforcement that's effective, we talked about this, that employees are likely to revert back to their old habits or comfortable ways of doing things. Utilization is not sustained or consistent. And, you know, probably one of the worst things that can happen is it can become a belief in your organization or a confirmation that we can't effectively implement or manage change in this organization. So those are just some things to keep in mind. Okay, So we talked about some of these strategies in each of the steps of the AGCAR process, but here's some additional information. So what can I do if there are signs of low awareness? Well, certainly senior leaders can be leading out front, communicating on a regular basis about the business reasons for the change, the value of it, including the risk of not changing, how maybe the external environment is creating the need for change. That's another example. Also, face-to-face communication with supervisors on how the change impacts employees individually. So again, this is where this communication piece is so important, not only from senior leadership, but also some consistent messaging by the direct supervisors. Desire, there are some top 10 steps for managing resistance, right? So what we need to do in order to move past the resistance issues is we have to get to the root cause or the core issue, right? So what is getting in the way of this person being able to change their behavior? And again, that's coaching, right? Coaching comes in handy. There are also some other tips managing resistance that are on the bottom of page 13. Some of them previously mentioned. So listen and understand objections. You may focus more on the what versus the how. Identify and remove barriers. Provide simple, clear choices and consequences. So, it may get to the point, unfortunately, where there's been training and there's been coaching and someone is still demonstrating some unwillingness. And at some point, there may need to be that consequence line communicated. Look for ways to create hope and provide support and stability to employees that, hey, I know this is tough now, but here's where it's going to help us get to, right? Talk about the vision and how the future can be better as a result. You may even, based on your relationship with your employee, make a personal appeal. So a lot of us have really strong loyalty and personal connections with our employees, which is great. And that may be an opportunity for you to even just ask for their support or demonstrate that you're really behind the change as well. Convert the strongest dissenters. So if there are, one or two people that are really having a challenge or maybe even negatively communicating to others about this change, or that active resistance that you might see, those are key opportunities to provide some coaching directly with those employees. Demonstrate consequences if needed, and you may consider providing some incentives if that's practical. Okay? So we talked about awareness, desire, knowledge. We have to look at training that directly addresses the behaviors and the skills that we're requiring. And, this is an opportunity to leverage HR or other training and development or learning professionals to help you put together training. Ability, that's where we have to continue beyond the training to provide useful, user-friendly, easy, accessible resources. Supervisor, provide coaching, leveraging community, mentors, right? And then reinforcement, we talked about not only messaging from senior leadership, but also reinforcement through positive and constructive feedback from the supervisors, okay? So I think we've got some good strategies to work from. So what we're going to do now, before we dive into future state, is on pages 14 through 16, actually it goes a little bit beyond that. It's like 14 to 17 of your packet. Starting on page 14, there's a personal change worksheet. This is a tool that you can use to help identify where the greatest gaps are in the change process. So we're going to utilize this in this session today. by thinking about, okay, what is a personal change in behavior that I am trying to facilitate with a work associate or direct report that's failing, okay? So this could really be any behavioral change that you have as an expectation of a person. So maybe it's around, some performance factor. Maybe it is related to a change initiative. But for the sake of this exercise, think about, okay, what is a specific expectation for change? I need someone to change their behavior, and I've communicated that. However, this person is not following through, okay? And so what you're going to do is you're going to work through each step in this assessment, okay? So once you identify a change that you'd like to see happen with a work associate or direct report that's not working, you're going to complete the worksheet to the best of your ability, rating each element of ADKAR on a scale of 1, which would be low rating, to 5, which would be high. So if we're looking at awareness as an example, if I rated it a 1, that would be, I'm assessing this person has a very low awareness of the reason that I'm asking them, or the value and the why behind the behavior change that I am requesting. Be sure you select a range you've been trying, be sure you select a change you've been trying to make happen that is not working regardless of your continued efforts. That's going to help provide a better result for you, okay? So brief description of what that change looks like, and then go through each section. Just provide a very brief description on the left column, and then do your best to rate on the scale of 1 to 5, 1 being low, 5 being high, for each of those areas. Once you've done that, you'll see that there's an opportunity on page 16 to do your scoring. And it's pretty it's descriptive. It's pretty easy to understand, but if you have any questions, make sure you note that in the chat. So I'm going to give you all about 5, maybe even 10 minutes to work through that, and then we'll do a debrief together. Okay? Any questions about how to do it? Okay, checking in to see how people are doing. If anybody would like some more time, let me know.
Or vice versa. If you're done, just maybe say done in the chat window. Okay. We reset the mic as requested by some folks, and most people are saying done.
Good. Okay. So if you haven't already done so, on page 16, you'll see a little bar graph there at the bottom. And if you want to, if you have this printed and you want to do your coloring skills, test your coloring skills, you can shade in for each one of these areas where you scored. Okay, that helps you get a visual of your highs and lows for each category. So on page 17, you'll see a couple of examples of scores that came out of an assessment. And on the first one, the lowest score is A, okay? So that would indicate a low awareness. So we talked about some of the strategies for low awareness. And on the second one, you see there is low K, or knowledge. And actually a close second to that is ability. So we've got low knowledge and ability. I'm inclined to think that those two can go hand in hand often. Certainly, I think it's interesting that there's higher ability and lower knowledge in this one, but that could be the case depending on what the new behaviors or skills are. So if it's low K, then you know that there's some training and learning gaps there to address, okay? So I'm interested in hearing from you all. Did anybody get a score that was lower in any of the other areas? So in the D, right, desire, the ability, or the reinforcement, anybody get? Okay. So interested to hear if anybody is willing to share in which area of the AGCAR model they had the lowest score come up. The nice thing about this model, or using this tool, is it helps give you insight into where the biggest gap is, right? So that you can be targeted with your response and your approach to closing that gap. If you're not addressing the right step, then that could create some more frustration for people. It's also a tool that if people understand this model, so this is a model that you can adopt within your organization. So it doesn't have to be something that only people responsible for change management or leaders are aware of. It could be something that's rolled out and shared and used as a model and common language for your employees, employees can use a tool like this too to gain more awareness for themselves around what they need in each area of the change process. And that's actually really helpful, because if we can empower people to ask for what they need, then the onus isn't fully on the supervisors to identify what that is. Okay? So if everybody's operating from the same model and using the same tool, then there's a better opportunity to address any gaps. Okay? So checking in to see if there's any feedback around where people might have scored the lowest, or any insights into what strategies they might implement to address their low area.
Nothing coming in yet.
Okay. People online?
Everybody's online.
Okay.
They notice the technical difficulties we have.
Okay. You got some comments on that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Reinforcement. Lower scores were in knowledge, awareness, and reinforcement areas.
Okay. Okay.
This person thought that was the case, but this tool helped identify it.
Oh, good. Good.
Another person says low in reinforcement.
Okay. Yeah.
Might try to offer up an in-game reward.
Okay.
Person says ability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and often with the ability, it may be that we're just not taking the time to evaluate the effectiveness of the training. So figuring out what might not be working there, making some adjustments are helpful. Especially if you know you've got someone who, based on your experience working with them, they've got some competencies and skills. Or it could be another indicator that, okay, if you're asking someone to do something totally new and different that they've never done, you may have the opportunity to identify, okay, is this a capability that can be developed, right? And if not, that's another consideration.
Another person says lowest score in design reinforcement. Mm-hmm. I'm new to my roles, so I am getting to know my staff and how they best work and take suggestions from leadership.
That's great. Yeah, I think that's good insight that you have, because you can see that the desire and the reinforcement can be impacted based on your new relationship with people. And when we do the Leadership Essentials session, for example, one of our trainings, we talk a lot about building that foundation, that relationship with your employees, and getting to know, right, what are their natural styles, tendencies, and preferences, right, for how they communicate, how they perform their work. Building that trust, right, so they really believe that you personally care and they can depend on you and you're genuinely invested in their success. How they best receive feedback, right? What is their learning style? What type of recognition is most meaningful? So those take time, right, to get to know, especially with new employees. And if you're taking the time, right, to build that type of relationship, then it is easier to understand what motivates that individual and what type of reinforcement can be effective. So I think that's some really good insight that you had. So maybe, in addition to looking at some opportunities, specific opportunities in the desire and the reinforcement, maybe kind of looking at holistically, how can I develop the relationship and a greater understanding of what this individual needs to be successful. So it's great. Good. So hopefully this is helpful for you. I mean, I think, again, it's something that you can use at the individual level for the person who's actually going through the change themselves to help understand, okay, where are the gaps for me and how can I ask for what I need? But also for a supervisor and kind of stepping back and analyzing, okay, what's going wrong here and how can I be a little bit more strategic with my interventions, okay? So what to do differently next time. So when you're thinking about a change, right, if maybe there's a current change initiative, or maybe there's something that's planned for this year, some strategic initiative or some change that you know is happening this year in your organization. Maybe it's around what's going on currently. I think we got to be mindful about our need to be adaptive in the current situation, but we also need to keep our eye on the larger business objectives and that keep our organization moving forward. So consider future changes or upcoming changes, and based on what we talked about, what might you do differently, okay? So, you know, we have our past experience and our past change challenges that we can rely on, but we also have some new tools and some new strategies that we can apply to future changes, okay? So based on what you've learned today, you know, organizationally or for you as a leader, are there opportunities for better communication, more timely communication, more frequent communication, more support from senior leadership, more resources, right? So think about those types of things, okay? All right, so before we go to review, I have another tool that will help you with some planning, and it's on page 19. It's called the 4 Ps exercise. And so the goal of it is to help show the connection between the project side of the change and the intended outcomes and the employee groups who will be impacted by the change, okay? And this is something that you can do on your own, or ideally you can involve people like, for example, a project team to complete this exercise, okay? And the goal is once you complete the 4 Ps in this exercise, then it's going to put you in a better position to build out your plan for the change, okay? So the 4 Ps are project name, purpose, particulars, and people. And so in each column, you're gonna look at, number 1, the project. Okay, so what is this project or this change that we're thinking about? The next one is the purpose. Okay, why? What's the why behind it? Why are we doing this? What's the benefit, right? And be specific in describing what that benefit is. So it could be, you know, increased efficiency, increased revenue, margin, product development, right? Particulars is the 3rd column. So what will be changing in the organization? So this is the meaty part of it. So the nuts and bolts of the change. So what's the specific impact to processes, systems, tools? It could be even structural, so it could be job roles or your organizational structure. So it's really describing what will be different in the future than today. And then the last column is people. So who in the organization will be impacted? Okay, it could be everybody, right? It could be specific groups. Likely, there will be some individuals that may be impacted differently than others. So considering that, right, whose day-to-day activities will be impacted by this and who will be doing things differently when this is implemented, okay? So again, this is something that is probably beneficial to do, get some group input, whether it be a project team or people, a group of stakeholders in your organization who are going to be responsible for participating in this change process, getting their input. For the sake of our session today, I'm going to have you just kind of feel this out by thinking about a future change that you're anticipating and jotting down some notes in each column just to kind of get you started with this. So for example, here at Xenium, we have a new tool, a new technology tool that we're going to be implementing this year. So we're kind of in the early stages of planning for that. So that might be an example that we could use internally to go through, right, as part of our initial planning process and identify the 4 Ps. Okay, so think about what is relevant to you in terms of a change that you see in the foreseeable future, and how might you take some notes in each of these columns to help you get more prepared and be proactive. Okay, so I'll give you just a few minutes to noodle on that and take some notes. Okay, so some examples I mentioned before that we're implementing a new system. It's a new CRM. So remember I talked about our old prior initiative to implement CRM in the first place. Well, this year, one of our initiatives is to change our CRM, and we're changing it to a module that is part of our HRIS system, our Human Resource Information System. Okay, so the project name is the name of the actual system called Client Space, and then the purpose is that it is going to better integrate with our HRIS, and it's also going to allow us to leverage it for workflows and provide some opportunities for some process efficiencies for us, and a better single record of data and communication. Okay, so that's the purpose. Particulars, there's a lot to unpack there, but basically, we're going to start with changing the way that we track our service activities. So as opposed to being a Microsoft CRM, they're now going to be in this client space. And so there's going to be a new process, similar but different process for how people enter information. That's one of the examples of particulars. The people that are affected, it's really going to be our whole company. So really anybody who touches clients are going to have to adopt and implement this new system and change the way that they're tracking, okay? So that's an example of how this might be utilized, okay, to kind of provide some context for the overall change that will inform your plan, okay? Any questions or comments on this exercise? Okay. So if this is something that you think might be beneficial, I would think about, okay, let's test it out and experiment with it, this 4Ps exercise, before I'm getting ready to implement something new. See how it works for you, okay? There is some additional description information on the top of page 20. There's also a link. It's really small, but there's a link to the ProSci website. And there are tons of tools and resources on that website relating to the ADKAR model and the things we discussed. They also have a change management certification that you can seek out, especially if you want folks within your organizations to be SMEs in this field, okay? So I'd encourage you to check that out. There's a lot of free resources there too, okay? So wrapping up, we talked about change management being focused on the people side of change. So while there still may be that project management piece, and certainly we need the leadership or executive sponsorship, we really need to make sure that we're focusing on the people and behavioral side of the change. ADKAR is a model that we've adopted that we can use to work through each step of that change and also to help assess people's progress at each level, and where there are gaps, we can implement some strategies or corrective actions that we discussed. Again, I'd mentioned before that if you're going to adopt a model, it is helpful to roll it out to your whole organization so you have that common language, and not only do leaders and supervisors know how they can support employees, but also employees can identify what they need and ask for the support where needed. Okay, so change management involves both individual and organizational perspective, and it requires action and involvement by leaders and managers throughout the organization. So I always say leaders, so folks who are viewed as leaders in the organization, regardless of whether or not you have the title or not, but certainly supervisors and managers have the greatest impact on employee engagement, workplace performance. I mean, you're the ones that are engaging with employees day to day. You're able to more proactively see where people are struggling and have an opportunity to have some conversations and do that training and coaching. So hopefully you find this as an additional tool to add to your leader toolbox. If you have any questions about anything that we talked about today, please feel free to reach out. Brandon feels really bad about the last snafu, so we're not going to beat him up about it with the connectivity. We appreciate you all hanging in with us through this somewhat of an experiment. We'll make sure that a link to a quick survey gets out to you all, because we do want your feedback. If this type of training is helpful to you, if you want this in addition to what we currently offer, or you like this even better, we want to hear about that too. If there are things that we can do to make the experience better for you, let us know about that as well. Okay.
Yeah, thanks for joining us and for bearing with us through all the technical problems. We'll be better next time. A couple questions we're getting are about the certificates. So
Yes.
we'll send them out to everybody that attended today
so
in a
we
PDF.
can send an electronic certificate. Yep. We'll send that out along with a link to a quick survey.
Yeah, a couple just quick anecdotes here. A lot of people are appreciative of not having to drive an hour to this training.
Okay.
So they like the virtual. So I think when we send out the survey, if you did like the virtual option, maybe something we look at offering every once in a while. So let us know.
Great. Any other final questions about the tools, anything that we discussed today?
Another question about the certificate. Is it a SHRM certificate or HRCI? Is it both?
It's SHRM.
Okay, SHRM.
Yes. So Society for Human Resource Management. For those of you who are not HR professionals, we offer recertification credit for HR folks who have that certification.
Okay, we'll hang on a couple more minutes for questions if otherwise I think we're wrapped up.
We're wrapping up. So if you don't have any questions, feel free to log off, and we appreciate you attending. And if anybody has any final questions, I'll hang out for another few minutes. Happy to do some Q&A.
Yep, we'll sit here and we'll moderate for a few more minutes. I think here's a good question. How would you present this to direct reports?
In terms of the model and the tools?
Yeah, the model itself.
Yeah, I think ideally it's something that's adopted at the organizational level. If you don't feel like that's possible, then I think it's fine to share the tool and say, hey, here's a change management model and tool, and I'd like to review it with you or the team and see how we might apply this. So yeah, I think maybe pulling some of the information that we went over in the packet, maybe checking out that website. There are some videos, I believe, on the website, that ProSci website. So just providing some initial education and getting some feedback from the team or direct reports on whether or not they think it would be helpful. I say this about the Grow coaching model too. I'm a big fan of being transparent with saying, hey, here's a tool that I've adopted or I think is valuable for coaching conversations, and not having that be something that only supervisors have access to and kind of do to employees. So I think anytime you find a model that's useful, sharing that, and looking at, okay, how can this become our process?
Another question that just came in is, do you have any ideas for reinforcement, rewards, incentives that you have seen work well with this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's funny. I think about what came to mind. Just it's a timely thing, but Brandon has a program, an internal marketing program called Passport.
We're gonna have to delay that a couple of months. I don't know if people internally know that yet. But. So
Passport to Xenium, and it really is an initiative to drive branding and marketing behaviors within an organization.
And culture.
We've expanded it to include some wellness and culture behaviors consistent with our values. But basically, it's a program. It has points for activities, points for behaviors, and then when points are earned, there is a tangible reward. So gift cards. They go all the way up to
we have
higher priced items.
I think for like first place, you can get Bose headphones or AirPods and iPads, stuff like that.
Yeah. So that's a fun way if you have the budget for that. I think, again, I think what's most effective when you have a change management plan, if you're incorporating those milestones and identifying some way to have some sharing, group sharing of successes, and maybe some peer acknowledgement and feedback that kind of helps the team increase some collaboration versus just the recognition coming from leadership down. I think having that as well as some opportunities for peers to celebrate and appreciate each other is helpful for reinforcing behavior. It could also be, hey, we're going to do a team lunch. We're all going to go out, or we're going to do something fun together at this particular milestone or when this happens, and having people know that that's coming versus just surprising them at the end. That can be helpful.
I like the idea of milestones where you could reward an entire team. Pizza parties is an easy one, maybe a team happy hour, or bring in lunch.
Yeah. And hopefully,
and especially like lead people there where they know it's coming if they hit certain milestones and,
right.
and whatever change is happening.
Yeah, I think the challenge in right at this moment is like a lot of those activities require people being close together and in groups. So now again, with this whole focus on adaptability, we have to be more creative, and we have to think, okay, if we're in this remote type of workforce mode for a while, how can we get creative around what those celebrations or rewards look like? So I would solicit some input from folks on the team.
Yeah, find out what's important to people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions?
No other questions.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We appreciate your participation, hanging in there, providing your feedback. Watch for our email with the certificates for those who need those, and a really quick survey to let us know how things went for you and what you like to see in the future. Okay. Take care and be well, everybody.
Thank you, guys.